After entering the time lock, Sam ends up at the Temple of Hatshepsut. The level serves as a decent way to introduce new players into Serious Sam's Egyptian setting and to some of the most common enemies. It also does a neat job, whether intentional or not, of enticing players to seek out secrets, as the rocket launcher can be seen by keen-eyed players on the right side of the temple during the cutscene. The Oasis secret in the distance can also be seen. This level is really short if the secrets are skipped, but they are really worth getting here. Besides health and ammo, the double-barrel shotgun and the rocket launcher help jumpstart the player's arsenal with some much-needed damage and a good medium to long-distance weapon.
Now that's some serious firepower.
They aren't necessary, but they definitely help. Sam's favorite Smith & Wesson, or I guess Smith and Wesson, is useful early on for its infinite ammo and in the Alley of the Sphinxes level. Netriska explains how Sam's revolver has infinite ammo by being augmented with a device from Mental's minions. It doesn't have the greatest damage, but it is useful against the Beheaded and the Kamikazes. There aren't many times where you'll need to conserve ammo, especially with the double ammo given on the serious difficulty. The revolvers are more so your starting medium to long range weapon. Sam's knife, on the other hand, is a bit underrated. It does a good amount of damage, yet it also puts the player at risk with needing to be next to enemies. Once the amount of monsters exceeds a small group, it's best not to use the knife unless you know how to kite the enemies. Players who are familiar with the enemy's AI can exploit openings to kill them faster than the revolvers, as long as they're not kamikazes. Netriska mentions that the knife can be used to silently kill enemies from behind. You almost never get the chance to do so, so why would you bother in the first place? There are only 2 parts in the first encounter where stealth could be possible, but in both scenarios, it's not achievable, one of which is used for a gag. We'll just take it as flavor text and move on. The Beheaded are some of the common enemies faced early on, which come in 4 variants, all of which have low pools of health and a low amount of damage, making them more like fodder, with the exception of the 4th variant, who I'll talk about in the next level. The Rocketeers, characterized by their purple shirt, fire a single magic missile based on the player's last location, making them easy to dodge as long as you're not standing still. Bombers have a green shirt and also aim at the last location, but with a grenade. The arc of their grenade makes them better suited to attack from an elevated position, where it'll naturally be harder to shoot them since they can throw over obstructions while using it as cover. It doesn't always work, as the AI would prefer to have a line of sight to the player and thus moves out of the cover that the elevation could provide. Although this can be explained within the game with how the Beheaded still see through their head that they carry by their waist. Firecrackers wear a red shirt and are a bit more unique than the other 2. Their missiles slide across the ground in a arc shape, so if the player is close, they'll likely need to jump to avoid the attack. If they're far away enough, the different angles that the missiles travel on may leave enough room to simply step aside to dodge them. While the low amount of damage doesn't spur any urgency to dodge the firecrackers' attack, it's still a neat way to involve jumping in combat, rather than the usual bunny hopping in other games. Knowing that the Beheaded are zombie Syrians tells us that the Expedition Syrians on Earth could very easily blend in with the Egyptian populace. It also gives a possible explanation of how they faded from history. They could have been assimilated into the human populace, so some humans could have a tiny amount of Syrian ancestry in them. It's a bit hard to believe that each one of them would become insane and die from their loss of culture, especially given how the Syrians were at least an interplanetary species. There's more about this in Serious Sam 3, but for the sake of simplicity and the scope of this analysis, that'll be for another time. Gnar are another common enemy early on with some variants. The male and female Gnar are the same besides their color and the females having slightly more health. Either one can be a levitating or invisible variant, or even both. The levitating ones are nothing special, they can just fly with their limbs retracted. How they can do this isn't explained. Any type of Gnar does not do that much damage, although the flying ones are more dangerous on Fusion because their attacks don't miss as easily in Classic and they tend to stick on you. The main concern with Gunnar is how they can body block you like a lineman, letting other more dangerous enemies get an opportunity to hit you. This is made worse as they're usually in packs. The invisible Gunnar are the most dangerous as they are hard to see. That allows them to sneak up and body block much more easily, along with another troublesome thing. Serious Sam's definition of invisible is quite hard to see compared to other games. This can lead to situations where the player can accidentally blow themselves up from an invisible Gunnar that got too close. Gunnars aren't silent, so you should be able to hear their growl and piece together that if you don't see one, they're either in your blind spot or there's an invisible one nearby. It's a nice dynamic that can make a weak enemy dangerous without increasing their damage. Besides that, Netriska describes them as animals that originate from Sirius and have been trained by Mental to attack opposing forces. It tells us that Mental assimilates species as well as zombifying them. Since we know that Mental's goal is to exterminate all intelligent life, and now we see that he lets some species live to fight for him, then there are two possibilities. Either he lets species that he deems unintelligent live, which means that there could be simple aliens out there that were left alone, or that Mental only keeps them alive to fight in his army, which I assume he would massacre when everything else is dead. They at least have to be manipulable for Mental to recruit them, or else the Syrians wouldn't be beheaded. Another enemy introduced here are the Clear, and arguably the most common one that occurs throughout the entire game. On Serious difficulty, there are some Clear spawners that are only enabled on Serious, and some that are switched to spawn Clear instead of their usual one on lower difficulties. I hope that you like them, because they are everywhere. They would have been as iconic as kamikazes, but this game spams them so much that it leans more towards being an annoyance. What I think is more iconic with them is how Crow Team loves putting them in ambushes, especially around corners. So much so that it's a good habit to check around each corner even if you don't hear their snarl that indicates that one is nearby. One may call that PTSD from getting pounced one too many times, but with how much damage they do, I think that's just being precautious. They are a force of rattling bones who will relentlessly attack, and one of the most mechanically challenging enemies of Serious Sam. In the early game, the player has to rely on shotguns or the knife to take care of Clear, which means getting into pouncing range. The single barrel shotgun can flinch them if enough damage was done, or they can be killed in one hit with the double barrel, although sometimes it doesn't always do so due to distance or bullet spread. Either way, the player will have to learn how to dodge them given the shotgun's limited range, or if they want to try their hand with the knife. The revolvers could be used to fight them at a longer range, but only if there's one Clear due to the revolver's okay fire rate and low damage. Clear usually come in multiples or with other enemies, so the point still stands. It's best to get familiar with dodging Clear now, as later they will become more numerous. It's also a good idea to learn their behavior, as it will help you predict their movement if one happens to slip behind you. Otherwise, it's likely that you'll get overwhelmed. The short delay after they pounce before they start charging again makes having one get behind you not a death sentence, as well as making it possible to kite them. It gives enough time to position yourself for another dodge if they can't be taken care of right away. Any that slip behind you means that you'll need to stay aware of them in your head so that you can strafe out of the way of their next attack. Or you could just use the third-person perspective to see them. This works with any amount of Clear, with larger amounts being more difficult and requiring more skill. This is where knowing the behavior of them comes in handy, as predicting their movement is key to surviving, since there are too many of them to focus on with sight alone. If there's only a couple of Clear, it may be best to just keep dodging them to focus on more dangerous enemies, such as an arachnoid or a major biomechnoid. It really depends on the situation in which the player will need to build that intuition. Clear also helps show off the design choice of making the movement speed of Sam slower than previous first-person shooters that came before. This allows melee enemies like Gunnar and Clear to outrun Sam and eventually dogpile him. The only options left is to fight and thin out the herd before they can reach you, or kite them around by strafing if there are too many. Sure, holding the backwards and fire buttons is a meme of Serious Sam, but I'd argue that's mainly only true on lower difficulties. On Sirius, the enemies move 25% faster. You're not going to keep your distance for long. The only saving grace is how dealing enough damage to reach a threshold will flinch a clear and stun them for a brief moment. That makes it a good idea to spread out your damage across a wave to keep them at bay for as long as you can, or just kill them as quickly as possible. The caveat is that using explosives to spread out that damage, besides the cannonball, may throw clear in weird directions and make things more chaotic. Clear also have a ball and chain that they can throw. The move is more so to pin the player down by pincering them, since it's as easily dodged as the Rocketeer's missile. They are, however, more numerous as they can throw 2 at a time. Admittedly, this attack kind of sucks as the tracking is really poor. They throw the balls and chains in a way where strafing will keep you well away from their path. A smaller area doesn't help either, and they get destroyed from any jagged edges in the terrain as they break upon impact with anything. The best compliment that I can give is that it's a nice allegory for being eternally imprisoned by mental, since Clear are resurrected skeletons of an extinct species from Sirius on planet Clear. From what I could find in terms of history, the mortuary temple of Hatshepsut's only connection to the Sirius Sam lore is how it was the endpoint of the beautiful festival of the valley, which starts at Karnak Temple. It's led by the god Amun, who is heavily featured from the middle of the game onward. The celebration focused on linking the living and the dead, hence its start and endpoints. It's very similar to China's Qingming Festival or Mexico's Dia de los Muertos. Even though Amun leads the festivities, it's not necessarily just for Amun, and also Mut and Kansu, who are Amun's family, but also for convening with deceased relatives. In terms of Sirius Sam lore, these extravagant monuments and festivities may seem like the Syrians were drunk on power, since that is what caused the Memphis leaders to stage a revolt in Thebes. Yet maybe that wasn't always the case, as shown here as an attempt to honor their dying species, as well as for the humans' loved ones. It shows sincerity, and maybe as the Syrians turned insane, their attitudes shifted to wanting to be more revered than benevolent. Another sincere intent in honoring people is how the Crow Team and fans' big heads are entombed within the temple. They feature Crow Team staff and prominent fans who say their name when you're next to them. Here are who the fans are. Levelord, who was a level designer for Duke Nukem 3D, he gave his endorsement for the first encounter, which you can see his quote on the front cover. Booger is John J. Dick, the voice actor for Sam Sirius Stone. Matt Lutrosis McGill is mentioned within the Sirius Editor Tips and Tricks text document, so he helped others ease into using the tool. Michael Harris also helped players by making tutorials for the Sirius Editor as seen in the game files. OMM stands for Old Man Murray, a popular games journalism website who helped Crow Team gain a publisher by being featured as the website's first interview, along with praise given to the first encounter. Corey Wussboy Peters is someone that I can't identify their contribution, but they're named in the credits under additional morale boost. Within the Sirius Editor Tips and Tricks document, 3 people are credited without a big head to represent them: Forager, Land Thief, and Xavier Online. Forager made tutorial maps for the Sirius Editor. Land Thief and Xavier Online worked on Seriously Warped Deathmatch. Corey Wussboy Peters, however, cannot be Land Thief nor Xavier, since their full names are credited in the second encounter. And for those of you who are wondering, Seriously Warped Deathmatch started development before the first encounter released, so there was time to make them big heads. So the best guess by process of elimination would be Forager, but even that I doubt, because why would Wussboy be the nickname rather than Forager? Wussboy's contribution remains a mystery to me. The rest of the big heads are the original Crow Team staff. The Temple of Hatshepsut is a rather boring level due to not having that many enemies and lots of walking, unless you skip the secrets and go straight for the exit. This can be somewhat forgiven as it is the first level to introduce players to the game, except for the long walk from the temple to the Oasis secret and back. I get that it's a secret, but it's a long walk any way you slice it. There are the major biomechanoids that spawn in to help alleviate it, or the harpies if you cut down the tree. They will take a while to kill with just the revolvers, but there's plenty of time to spare. Despite how dangerous the major biomechanoids can be, they're not much of a threat here due to the distance you can gain on them, making their rockets inaccurate. They do provide a good chance to try out your own rocket launcher if you grab that secret beforehand. It's very useful, not just for enemies but also for rocket jumping and getting secrets that are behind a breakable wall. However, rocket jumping isn't particularly useful unless you're trying to cheese the game. The rocket launcher is best used if you memorize how many rockets it takes to kill enemies. It's not so much for ammo efficiency, although it does help, but for crowd management, as you can shoot off as many rockets as needed, then focus on another enemy. Sometimes the enemy's projectile may prematurely explode the rocket, so it's not a guarantee. Aiming away from where their projectiles will appear, such as their legs or head, can help reduce that chance. An extra rocket can help as well. Just make sure to lead your shots as the rockets do take a bit of time to travel. It's a very good weapon to use against large and high health enemies. It can be good for a crowd, but its relatively slower fire rate compared to the grenade launcher or an automatic weapon like the minigun leaves something to be desired as it's not as effective. Also, as the horde closes in on you, that splash damage from the rockets will probably deal more damage to you than the enemies. The slower weapon swap speed on Classic makes it a bit inconvenient to change weapons, so sometimes you might have to take that splash damage to avoid getting hit if it's worth it. Both of the shotguns can be found here as well. The single barrel shotgun is obviously good at close range and okay at medium range. It's good for the early levels and against enemy fodder in the late game to conserve more valuable ammo. But due to its low fire rates and short range, I wouldn't use it to fight a wave or an arena if it's dense with enemies. The same goes for the double barrel shotgun, which can kill clear in one shot or wearables in two. Unfortunately, that isn't always a guarantee for the clear due to the random spread of the pellets. The pellets hit their target instantly, so they don't have a cone-like spread where it's more concentrated right after leaving the barrel, hence why it's a bit unreliable to kill clear in one shot. The double barrel has more power than the single barrel, however it's only good at close range and has a longer reload animation. The only clear factor that determines which shotgun to use in the early game are kamikazes. You should use the single barrel if there are kamikazes in the wave because of the faster fire rate. If you want to be technical, the double barrel shotgun can fire 4 shells in the time it takes to fire 3 shells from the single barrel, giving the double barrel a faster fire rate. In practical use, the extra damage from the double barrel is wasted since they don't have much health at all. The amount of times you can fire is more important than the amount of shells used in this scenario or in others dealing with low health enemies. It's just a matter of deciding which is more optimal, which depends on the situation. Usually the single barrel works better against fodder like headless frogs and fish for the faster fire rate, and the double barrel for clear wearables and minor mechanoids for the extra damage. Of course, this is just a comparison between the two shotguns. Other weapons can work just as well or better for certain scenarios and enemies. Before ending the level, there's a sign of Crow Team's cheekiness by having enemies spawn both in front and behind the player to make a sandwich. It's a bit tame at the moment, but it will grow in intensity. In terms of the current story, which all of the details will be in Aaaaaah for the entire game, it just covers some details about the pillage of thieves and how Sam needs to collect the 4 elements scattered within the tombs of the Theban Necropolis to open the gates of Thebes. But first, the sand canyon must be traversed to reach the tombs. Right before entering the Temple of Thutmose, we're introduced to Serious Sam's most iconic enemy, the beheaded kamikaze.
Yourself!
Kamikazes are former Syrian soldiers just like the rest of the beheaded, except they don't carry around their head like the others. This also implies that they have no visual or auditory sensors, yet they have no issue finding Sam. They're easy to kill and a useful tool to damage nearby enemies. If they get too close, they hurt like hell and really disrupt your movement. Because of that, they demand the player's attention with their priority growing to the highest as they close in. That diversion may allow melee enemies to close the gap, or ranged enemies to sneak in a couple of shots, leaving less time to react. Kamikazes can also force the player to move in an unfavorable position from the natural response of wanting to keep distance away from them. While an enemy like Clear have the player focusing on dodging, Kamikazes exert a zone of control and restrict the player's movement. Arena fights where they trickle in kamikazes from all around the player demonstrates the natural push versus pull over control of the land between the player and the kamikazes. Their signature scream also makes their presence known, allowing the player to assess how much of a current threat they are. The screaming gives away the kamikaze's relative distance and direction to the player, but this can get difficult to pinpoint when they come from multiple directions. Fortunately, Crow Team knew this and made those moments kamikaze-only fights so that other enemies don't pollute the audio. Whenever they are mixed in with other units in multiple directions, they're usually in 1 to 2 quantities so that their screaming still relays their distance and direction. The flinch mechanic is really helpful against kamikazes as it can save you from a mistake of miscalculating the priority of a kamikaze or not being able to deal with it fast enough. It does require a delicate touch because of their low health, but in hectic situations, it rewards the player for being calm and intentional with their actions. Some secrets, such as the hidden valley right before entering the temple, are difficult to get on the Sirius Engine 1 with the jumping and sliding physics. In the HD versions, you can simply walk up it. There's always the option of rocket jumping to get up there easily, but the rewards are not worth the damage received, especially on serious difficulty. These types of secrets are only in this level, and I guess if you count the Moon Mountains waterfall one, so it's not that big of a deal. Yet, it is still a bit tedious spending a couple of minutes trying to parkour up a cliff. I believe it's because of how they calculated hitboxes. In an interview with Crow Team founder Davor Humsky, he mentions how they approximated hitboxes with spheres instead of cubes to help with performance. It also allowed them to have multi-directional gravity.
To speed up the collision, we were not able to use the real geometry of cubes for collision, but we approximated them with several spheres. On one side, that speed up immensely our collision tests, because actually test with the cube is really easy one. And the second gain that we got is that we could have multi-directional gravities, so characters would be able to walk on ceilings, on inside the spheres. So we had several types of gravity, and we actually put that into the game as a secret places, locations, and that was really awesome.
Given how the Sirius Engine 3 and future iterations did away with multi-directional gravity, and how these cliffside secrets are easier to obtain on the HD versions, the hitbox approximation with spheres is likely the issue. The inside of the temple leans into the whole tomb raiding theme of dark, foggy rooms and traps, as we'll see continue in the next level. There's also some of Sam's personality shown with a cultural reference to Indiana Jones, and a quote that shows Sam's eagerness for battle and distaste for Mental's horde, which was adapted by Crow Team through a one-liner contest on their website.
I'm over here, you stupid headless freaks.
Also, not to forget Sam's.
Oh, yourself. Uh-oh.
It gets pretty clear that Sam Sirius Stone isn't so serious and is more like a cartoon hero. Someone who will get the job done no matter what, but will have fun while doing it, whether through cool action fights or one-liners. It's similar to Duke Nukem in a more PG way, which, in the same interview mentioned earlier, we can see the Duke's influence on Sam's character in the snippet of the game design document shown. It was made alongside the alpha of Serious Sam to market to publishers, so things are outdated. It describes him as a superhero who's here to kick alien ass and get with some hot babes. As we can see in the document and the recent quotes by Sam, his seriously silly and eagerness to kill aliens attitude stayed. Sam would eventually carve out his own identity when the first encounter was released, especially with the Xbox port. This is shown more clearly in the last scene of the game where Sam has the most dialogue. This temple introduces arenas where enemies will come at you from multiple directions. It's here where we meet the Marsh Hoppers and find the Tommy gun early from a secret to deal with them. Marsh hoppers from Rigel Taurus, or frogs as I like to call them, are really squishy and slimy that always comes in swarms that turn the floor green. This one doesn't originate from Sirius, as their full name says, but instead they come from the Alpha Centauri star system. We can now confirm that Mental has been through Sirius and Alpha Centauri, so he was relatively close to Earth. Luckily, it is spacious out there. Frogs are another suicidal enemy like the kamikaze. They don't kill you outright, but act more like an attritional force. They take away precious bullets better used for other enemies since they die in one hit from anything, but they're usually so numerous that you have to use the Tommy gun or minigun to get rid of them quickly enough, lest they chip away at your health. In smaller groups, the single-barrel shotgun works fine. Even though an explosive weapon like rockets or grenades seem like they would work well, and they do, don't get me wrong, I don't like using them as there's too much of a risk of dealing damage to yourself. The frogs will be close as you kite them around, which the splash damage can nick you, or a frog can hop in your face right as you shoot and deal a massive amount of self-induced damage. That risk is just too high on serious difficulty. Bullets are safer and their high rate of fire can whittle them down. Speaking of bullets, the Thompson submachine gun deals a low amount of damage, the same as the revolvers, but at a fast rate. It's a general weapon that's useful in any fight, from shooting down enemy projectiles to taking care of fodder enemies, while being capable of handling a tougher enemy without needing to switch weapons. It may not always be the optimal use of ammo against a tough enemy, but its high fire rate can get you through. It's particularly useful against kamikazes, where you can easily tap the trigger to flinch ones that are close or spray and pray for larger groups. While it seems the Tommy gun could replace the revolvers, ammo is still limited and it's churned through quickly. On the bright side, you don't have to worry about bullet spread as it has perfect accuracy. That accuracy makes it good for long distances, such as shooting down harpies. If you do enough damage, you can force them to land and keep your focus on the ground with all the other enemies. Although in practice, it's better just to kill the harpy outright. In the next room, there are traps where damage is likely unavoidable. Not the usual traps that you would think of like spikes and boulders. These are certified Crow Team specialties. So after the first arena of the game with the frogs, the player would likely be a bit parched on supplies. Crow Team's a bit stingy, so there are armor shards or pills that give +1 armor or health respectively. In this room, certain armor shards are rigged, where enemies will spawn near to you and attack. On Sirius, however, an additional clear is added to both traps, and they are within pouncing range. With other enemies, it's a bit more forgivable as there's more of a delay before they attack, but with clear know no mercy and leave little time for reaction. It's done throughout the game where spawns are swapped out for clear, or they're added in for serious difficulty along with other additional monsters. Some are also added in on hard, but not as much as serious. So you do sign up for the challenge, but it is something that you will need to be aware of ahead of time. Then the problem is that both of these spawns occur on serious and only one of them on hard. So there's no way of knowing that a clear will spawn right next to you, unless you're using a guide or this is your second playthrough on the serious difficulty, and you happen to remember the spawns. It's very unforgiving and it gets worse at times. However, it's hard to argue against it since it is the highest difficulty. But to any newcomers to the series watching, these surprise traps are the reason why this needs to be said. There is no shame in quick saving or save scumming in Serious Sam. No one cares. It's still your choice to either skip out on the resource or try again and see if you can fare better. It's not like a dice roll where you're trying to manipulate the outcome. The first encounter is a hard and sometimes unfair game due to moments where there is a low chance of living without knowing about the spawns, such as the Yodel secret in Suburbs. Moments like the Yodel secret don't solely rely on skill, they also rely on knowledge that is unobtainable ahead of time. Once you know the situation, you may even find them as fun challenges to overcome, as is the point of playing on serious difficulty. Either way, let the armor shards be a lesson that +1 pickups aren't always to be trusted. Also, be aware of suspicious looking areas that look primed for an ambush. Serious Sam may feature frantic gameplay, yet exploration requires caution given how Mental's horde can teleport in from anywhere. You may not be able to do much in preparation for those surprise attacks besides being mentally prepared. For example, the tight hallway right afterwards spawns Gunnar and Marsh Hoppers in front and Gunnar behind you while locking the door that you came in from. Similarly to before, the spawns from behind are only on hard and serious, but it is doubled on serious. If you rush forward to only have one front to deal with, there are two headless waiting for you. And if you survive that, picking up the much needed armor right after spawns a clear behind you only on serious. The mini sand canyon after the temple doesn't give any relief, but at least it's more open. Playing this part feels dense even if it is small, as every corner explored just pops in more enemies. Rushing ahead and triggering more spawns than necessary will become overwhelming. So it's another good lesson to learn that you should only try to move in a cleared area free of triggers to not accidentally cause more enemies to spawn in. There are also traps with the boulders being obvious, but we have another Crow Team specialty coming right up. It's the last time we'll be seeing any conventional traps like this, while the remaining two act more like environmental hazards than a trap. It's a bit of a shame that more dangers besides Mental's horde weren't used to add variety to the gameplay, at least for the first encounter. Especially considering that we're going through tombs at the moment that are usually booby-trapped in movies and games to keep things engaging. While it's a good hypothesis at the moment to assume that +1 pickups are trapped, Crow Team switches it up by making the health pill safe and the +50 armor a trap. With a wearable to distract the player, the predatory clear spawns on the cliff to run down and pounce on the player from behind. There's a trust issue of what items are safe, and it's up to the player to develop that intuition of what looks like an ambush over the course of the game. You can't mindlessly walk around in the first encounter until you've cleared an area, or else you may walk into the wrong neighborhood. Before ending the level, we're introduced to the minor biomechanoid. They are biological mechanisms grown in Mental's biotanks whose genome is programmed to grow mechanical parts. That's some pretty advanced technology. Mental may have taken the technologies of the species it has killed, or there is a Mental Research and Development Division somewhere. It's a bit odd that intelligent life is kept around, although it's not unheard of as we'll see with the reptiloids. Another possibility is that it's done with magic. There was an impression that Mental was like a nomadic horde that drifted and plundered anything it found, but this implies that there is some homeworld that Mental resides at. Currently, we're assuming that Mental is at Sirius given the game's backstory, who is either still at war with the Syrians or made it the base of operations. It's hard to tell since we have limited information about when and where Mental has been. Mental also disappears for thousands of years in between invasions, so maybe his base is in another dimension. I see the minor biomechanoids more like support units than attackers. They usually shoot too far away for their lasers to be effective since they're easily dodged by strafing. This can be explained by the line in its Netriska entry, adjusted to attack without thinking. You can also jump over the lasers to strafe the other way if needed. They also don't do that much damage with a single laser, but they do shoot in bursts of 8 to make up for it with a total of 80 damage. Additionally, they don't have that much health, with a single explosive being enough to kill them. So their role as a support unit is to chip away health with quantity over quality, and put pressure on the player's movement with many lasers by forcing them to strafe in a direction and jump if they want to change said direction if the burst is still active. It may not sound like much by itself, and I have to agree. Even in a wave, you can ignore them for the most part, whether there's one or a few, as long as you keep moving. It's the same issue as the Clear's ball and chain attack. Its tracking is too poor. The tracking when up close is fixed in the HD version, but the problem still persists when afar. One of the only times where they became a real threat is in the last level, which I believe shows their potential the best. Minor biomechanoids work much better in large quantities in a large area, which will be discussed in the last level, or in tight areas, which makes their lasers harder to dodge, like putting them at the end of a hallway or a corridor, like what they do in the next level. This level really dumps a lot of new enemies on the player, including the harpies and werebles that I haven't discussed yet, but will soon. They could have been spread out a bit more to help the pacing. All of the enemies except for one, and excluding the bosses, are showcased within the first 4 levels. Werebles could have waited for a more open level such as dunes, and harpies for a level that mainly takes place outside, like Moon Mountains. For example, werebles are rarely used until the 7th level, however they're introduced in the 2nd level and skip the 3rd level entirely. Harpies skip the 3rd level while making a one-time appearance with the wereble at the beginning of the 4th level, until becoming more common from the 5th level onward. The major biomechanoid is shown in the 1st level, but only shows up again for the same cameo appearance in the 4th level, until being used more starting at the 6th level. There is nothing necessarily wrong with introducing an enemy slowly in, but the first 4 levels are so jam-packed with introductions that you'll see almost everyone within the first 2 hours of the game. We now have the air element, and next up is Earth.